You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt, original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. Main Street was much quieter at night than during the day. The small shops had all closed, leaving only a few cafes with scattered pools of warm yellow light spilling onto the brick-paved street, glistening faintly under a misty sheen. At the far end of the street, the sign for the community clinic still glowed, the white fluorescent light cutting through the glass and casting a pale beam across the empty stretch of sidewalk in front. Hannah Voss, 34, head nurse at the clinic, was hunched over her desk, sorting through patient files after a long day. Born and raised in this coastal town, she had once dreamed of becoming a nurse in a major hospital in Portland. But 3 years ago, after her husband died from a rare illness, Hannah decided to return home, taking over the work at the community clinic to care for the people she had grown up with. Her life had since been quiet and private. She was used to waking up early, going to work, and returning to her small rented apartment a few blocks from the sea, spending her evenings reading or baking. She no longer dated, no longer dreamed of having a family. All she wanted was to help people and live a peaceful life. Her hands trembled slightly from fatigue, but her habit was to leave everything tidy before heading out. A draft of sea wind slipped through the crack in the door, making the wind chime ring softly. Hannah looked up, ready to say, "We're closed," as she always did, but the words stopped on her lips when she saw the man standing in the doorway. He was so tall she had to tilt her head a little more to take in his whole face. James Boone, about 38, a man she had seen a few times at the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. He usually wore an old flannel shirt, carrying a bag of apples or a couple of pies, and had never exchanged more than 3 polite sentences with her. But tonight he wasn't carrying any groceries, nor was he smiling politely. He stood there, his broad shoulders blocking some of the cold wind, his hands in the pockets of a thick coat, his gaze fixed directly on her. "Good evening." His voice was low and warm, quiet but enough to rise above the wind outside. Hannah nodded and set the file down. "Sorry, the clinic's about to close. Do you need help with something?" He stepped fully inside, letting the door close behind him. Then, without preamble, he said plainly, "I'll build you a home, and you'll help me build a family." The words landed more like a promise than a proposal. Hannah blinked several times, certain she had misheard. "Sorry, what did you just say?" James remained where he was, the fluorescent light catching the tan planes of his face and sharp features. His voice didn't waver, each word deliberate. "I'm building a house, on the land near Gulls Point. I don't want it to just be a house. I want it to be a home, and I can't do that alone." She let out a short laugh, half surprised, half trying to push this strange moment away. "Is this your idea of flirting?" "Not exactly." His gaze stayed calm. "I'm being serious." Hannah crossed her arms, feeling like she had just stepped into a story without anyone warning her of the script. "We've spoken to each other, maybe twice, and now you want to build something with me that sounds like forever?" He gave a slight shrug. "I've seen the way you work. Here at the farmer's market, when you helped an old man to his car because he couldn't stand steadily. You care about people. You love this place. That's the kind of person I want to build with." The word build carried both meanings, and Hannah heard them both. She almost made a joke to break the seriousness in his eyes, but couldn't. There was something about him, a steadiness, a certainty that stopped her from brushing it off as some bizarre joke. "You don't know anything about me," she said softly. "Maybe not all the details," he nodded slightly, "but I know you're not easily afraid. You've been through a lot and you're still standing. That's a solid enough foundation to build a home on." She was silent. For the past 3 years since her husband's death, Hannah had kept her heart locked tight. She lived only for work, staying far away from anything that might hurt her again. "Why me?" she finally asked. James looked straight into her eyes. His ash-gray gaze seemed to hold her image inside it. "Because I believe you understand the difference between a house and a home, and I think you're brave enough to help me build the latter." The answer wasn't sweet or sugar-coated, but it lingered inside her like a deep echo. Outside, the sea wind still blew, carrying the scent of salt and the damp wood of the harbor. She felt a trace of warmth seep into the room that had always been cold. She gave a faint smile, this time not entirely in mockery. You know, most people would start with a cup of coffee, or maybe dinner. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly as if revealing a quiet secret. I'm not most people. Hannah didn't know why she believed him, and that more than anything was what unsettled her most. The land at Gull's Point lay right on the edge of the coastal road, where each early morning the sunlight seemed to pour honey onto the water. From here you could look straight out at the endless stretch of ocean, where white-tipped waves rolled toward the rocky point and shattered like nature's own applause. The scent of sea salt was always in the wind, mingling with wild grass and pine resin. Once this had been the site of the Callahan family's small timber farm, one of the old, long-rooted names in town. The white-painted wooden house had once gleamed in the sun, its windows opening toward the sea, pale blue curtains fluttering in the summer breeze. But after old Mrs. Callahan passed away, her children scattered, leaving the house to the mercy of wind, rain, and time. The roof collapsed, the walls rotted, and the front yard grew wild with grass waist-high. When James bought the land, many assumed he would tear everything down and hire a construction crew to raise a new house in just a few months. James had money, everyone knew that, but he chose another path. From the very first morning, his old gray-blue pickup was parked at the corner of the property. James wore a flannel shirt, leather gloves, and faded jeans. There was no roar of heavy machinery, only the sound of a shovel breaking ground, a hammer driving nails, and the sea wind rushing through the tall pines. He worked with a slowness and patience that felt like he was tending something priceless. A few local workers were hired to handle the heavy jobs, pulling up roots, clearing debris, but from leveling the ground to raising the frame and shaping the wood, every part passed through his hands. Hannah never meant to keep track, but each time she drove past on her way to the clinic, her eyes instinctively searched for him. Some days the sky was gray, the wind cutting cold, and he'd be bent over, measuring each line of the foundation. Other days the sun blazed, sweat soaking the back of his shirt, but his rhythm never faltered, steady, like a man who knew exactly what he was building for the future. One afternoon, Hannah pulled over, bringing him a bottle of cool lemonade. He looked up, his ash-gray eyes flickering with mild surprise before he gave a nod. Thanks. She thought that was the end of it, but the next morning, a small brown paper parcel tied with twine sat at her door. Inside was a wooden keychain carved into the shape of a seashell with a tiny H etched along the side. The faint scent of freshly sanded maple lingered, as if it still held the warmth of the hands that had made it. Another time she brought him a tin of freshly baked oatmeal cookies. He accepted them without much comment, setting them aside as he continued working on a long bench of pine. The next day, another gift appeared at her door, a tall, slender vase turned from maple, its grains swirling like ocean waves. That vase was the reason she bought flowers for the first time in years. On a Saturday morning, Hannah brought a bunch of yellow tulips from the farmer's market along with the vase he'd given her. James was standing inside the newly erected frame of the house. He took the flowers, let her place them in the vase, and set it right on the windowsill facing the sea. Afternoon light streamed through the wooden frame, igniting the yellow petals in a blaze of color against the dust of the worksite. "You've just laid the first brick of this home," he said quietly, not looking at her, but his voice reached somewhere deep inside her. Hannah stood still. She didn't know if he meant the tulips or her presence. In the weeks that followed, her visits to the site became a quiet routine. Some days she brought hot coffee, other days a few muffins. In return, he gave her small, handmade things: a wooden picture frame, a letter holder, a smoothly sanded wooden spoon. One windy afternoon, she arrived to find him standing on the scaffolding, trying to keep his balance as the sea gusts whipped hard. A large plank suddenly tipped sideways. Hannah cried out in alarm. James caught it and leapt down, giving her a reassuring grin. "I'm fine. Out here, the only real danger is forgetting your hard hat." But she saw the long cut along his hand. Without a word, she pulled gauze and cotton from her bag and carefully wrapped the wound. He stayed silent as she worked, his gaze following her face, while she felt the warmth of his skin through her fingertips. One weekend evening, when the day's labor was done, they sat on the unfinished steps, watching the sunset turn the sea into molten copper. The breeze carried salt, and her hair lifted in it. James asked, "Why did you stay in Gull's Point?" She was quiet for a few seconds before answering, "Because this is the last place that still holds my parents' memories, and I wanted to do something meaningful here." He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Me too. Some places aren't just points on a map. They're part of who you are." After that day, their conversations weren't only about bricks or planks. They shared stories of loss, of starting over. Both had faced heavy falls, and both understood the value of building something slowly, steadily, whether it was a house or a relationship. Once when she teased, "At this pace, it'll take you a year to finish," he gave a quiet laugh. "Some things can't be rushed. A home is one of them." The way he said it made her think he might not be talking only about the house. She realized that, amid the hammering, the sawing, and the scent of fresh-cut wood, something else was taking shape, something no blueprint could capture, something no one could measure in inches or depth. It was trust, and with each strike of his hammer, he was chipping away at the walls she had built around her heart for the past 3 years. By May, the sea breeze in Gull's Point had grown warmer, carrying a softer salt scent and the dampness of early morning fog. The narrow roads along the shore burst into color as wildflowers bloomed, but at the same time a different kind of stir began to ripple through town, the sort of talk that sent a chill crawling up the spine. Rumors spread quickly, starting from the cafe on Main Street, drifting to the Owens' little grocery store, and buzzing through the weekend farmers market. A major real estate company from the city had its eye on this stretch of coastline. When Richard Garrett arrived, the rumor stopped being idle talk. He came to Gull's Point in a perfectly tailored silver gray suit, polished black leather shoes, hair combed back with precision, and a smile so well rehearsed it could almost pass for goodwill. His glossy black SUV stopped right in the town square, and next to the roundabout, a massive billboard had just gone up, bearing the logo of Coastal Horizons Development and the words "revitalizing our coastline, bringing the future to Gull's Point." It sounded polished. But to Hannah, who had been a nurse at the community clinic for over a decade, words like revitalization often hid another reality: gentrification. The process of longtime residents being pushed out of the very place they belonged to make way for gleaming resorts catering to the wealthy. That night's community meeting was more crowded than usual. Locals filled the wooden benches of the town hall, most of them familiar faces Hannah had once cared for as patients. Garrett stood at the podium, resting his hands lightly on the edge as if to appear approachable. "We want to transform Gull's Point into the premier coastal destination in Oregon," he said. "A beachfront resort, high-end shopping district, a modern marina. All of it will bring jobs, attract tourism, and raise property values for everyone." A few scattered claps came from younger residents who had only recently moved in, but most of the room stayed silent. From her seat in the middle row, Hannah glanced around and caught the worried eyes of people like Margaret Dawson, Ed Murphy, and the Price's folks who had lived here all their lives. Coastal Horizons' plan didn't take long to reveal its true nature. Just a week later, several households received invitations to sell their property for an attractive price, along with a warning that property taxes would soon spike due to market value reassessment once the project broke ground. For retirees living on fixed incomes, it was as good as an eviction notice. One Tuesday morning, while Hannah was checking a patient's blood pressure at the clinic, 78-year-old Margaret Dawson walked in unexpectedly. She didn't have an appointment, she simply sat down, her hands trembling as she pulled a stack of papers from her bag. "They sent me this. Said if I don't sell, my taxes will double. How am I supposed to pay that, Hannah?" Her voice shook. Hannah skimmed through the documents. The language was carefully crafted, no outright threats, but designed to make the recipient feel like there was no other choice. She squeezed the older woman's shoulder. "Don't sign anything yet. We'll figure something out." Inside, though, Hannah felt a surge of heat. She knew it would take just one tax hike or a mandatory repair order to force seniors out of the homes they loved. Over the next few weeks, more stories like Margaret's emerged. Tim Harris, a retired fisherman, was told that his dock did not meet new safety standards and would be dismantled unless he considered another option. meaning sell to Coastal Horizons. The prices were fine for building code violations due to a leaky roof, and the cost of repairs was so high that selling seemed like the only way to avoid debt. Meanwhile, Garrett kept his polished persona intact. He turned up at ribbon cuttings, new shop openings, and local fairs, always shaking hands, smiling, and saying things like, "We're bringing the future to Gulls Point together." But everyone knew that beneath that smooth handshake lay the real engine of his plan, a network of lawyers, brokers, and contracts sharp enough to cut. Hannah began to notice James's reactions whenever Garrett's name came up. He never joined in the conversation, but now and then his eyes would darken, his jaw tightening, especially when he heard news of another coastal property being sold. He kept working steadily on his house, but Hannah started to wonder, was Gulls Point and James's land in Garrett's sights? One afternoon, as Hannah was closing up the clinic, she spotted James's gray-blue pickup parked by the curb. He was talking with Ed Murphy, the owner of the old lumber shop at the end of the street. Ed looked upset, clutching a white envelope. James took it, read through it quickly, folded it, and nodded. When he caught Hannah's eye, he gave a brief wave before turning back to Ed. The moment passed quickly, but Hannah had seen enough to register the gravity in his expression. She walked toward her car with questions swirling in her mind. Did James know more than he let on? And was Garrett's interest in the town somehow personal to him? That evening, passing by James's construction site, she saw him still there even though dusk had already fallen. The work lights cast a narrow cone of gold over the sand. His shadow stretched long, his figure quieter than usual. She stopped, almost ready to call out, but didn't. There was a distinct feeling that James was holding on to part of a story, one tied directly to the storm, now rolling toward Gulls Point. Hannah wasn't an engineer, nor was she a lawyer, but she understood Gulls Point in a way no government document could ever capture. She knew who at the town hall tended to linger over their morning coffee, who was more agreeable if you brought paperwork in the afternoon, which counter had the shortest lines, and all the small details newcomers often miss, the kind that could still get a permit application sent back. When James decided to build his own house on the Rocky Point, she knew he'd be stepping into a maze of procedures with Garrett lurking somewhere inside. Garrett's Coastal Horizons was notorious for its timely community feedback and adjustment suggestions for the public good that in reality served only to delay or drive up an opponent's costs. For an outsider like James, a single error on a form could mean losing weeks, even months. "Let me help you file the permits with the town," Hannah said one afternoon as she stopped by the construction site. He was standing on the first-floor framework, holding a blueprint and a steel tape measure, the late-day sun pouring over the flannel on his shoulders like warm honey. James looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "I've got a legal team in Seattle, but you think I need help?" "Not in Seattle," she replied with a small smile. "Here." The next morning, they went to the town hall together. Hannah led him through the narrow hallway, lined with black and white photos of the town from a century ago. She greeted everyone by name, introducing him to Donna at the planning counter. "This is James, engineer and part-time carpenter." Donna chuckled, took the paperwork, and began flipping through it. "Second-story loft railing. I'll need an extra detail sheet. State's new code," Donna said, friendly but professional. Hannah nodded and glanced at James. He had already brought the supplemental drawing, rolled in a tube. The review moved along much faster than usual. When they stepped outside, the sea breeze hit their faces with a salty tang. James said quietly, "I could have hired someone to handle this, but with you, it feels less like walking through thorns." "That's only because I know who here likes lemon tarts," she teased. He laughed, one of those rare smiles that lingered a beat longer than expected. In the evenings, when the white LED lights lit the timber frame, they would sit together after the crew had gone. The sound of the ocean drifted in, weaving between the creak of settling wood and the measured tapping of nails. Hannah often brought hot soup or toasted bread. James would make coffee in a dented aluminum pot. One night, they spread a blanket across the first floor and lay back, looking up at moonlight filtering through rafters not yet roofed. Hannah spoke about her father, a fisherman lost to a storm 12 years ago. "He loved the sea, but the sea took him too," she said, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. James was silent for a long time before telling her about his mother, the woman who kept their lakeside cabin for 40 years, refusing to sell even when offered 5 times its value. She said a home isn't just wood and nails. It's where you keep your memories, and memories aren't for sale. They stayed like that, not needing to fill the quiet. Just the sound of the surf and their own steady heartbeats inside a space taking shape. One day when she asked why he chose to build so slowly, James paused, leaning on his hammer. Because every piece of wood I set down, I want to know it'll hold. A foundation has to be solid for a house or for love. If the base is weak, one good gust can tear it apart. The words hit deeper than Hannah wanted to admit. For 3 years, she'd grown used to building walls around her heart to protect it, to keep anyone from getting too close. But under the work lights, with the scent of fresh-cut timber and James's low voice in the air, she realized those walls were starting to have cracks. A week later, the permit was approved faster than either of them expected. James looked at the stamped paper and smiled in relief. "We've won 1 round," he said. "And there are plenty more to go," she replied. As they stepped out of the building, they ran into Garrett speaking with a few locals. He gave a polite smile, but his eyes flicked over James and lingered on Hannah, a silent reminder that the game wasn't over. Hannah's hand tightened lightly on James's arm, enough for him to feel it, invisible to anyone else. That evening, as the waves crashed against the point and the wind carried salt into the bare frame of the house, they sat on the makeshift steps. Hannah thought about the long road ahead and understood that trust wasn't born from promises, but from nights like this. 2 people sitting side by side, sharing both silence and stories, laying each brick not just for a house, but for something bigger. That day, the wind off the ocean carried an unusual chill into town, as if warning of an approaching storm. Hannah arrived at the construction site earlier than usual, planning to bring James a box of freshly baked blueberry muffins, still warm from the oven. He wasn't there. The gray-blue pickup truck was gone. She stepped inside the unfinished frame of the house, intending to leave the box on the temporary work table. Papers, blueprints, and a few small planks lay where they always had. But on one corner of the table, a manila envelope had been blown open by the wind. A few black and white photographs had slid out, scattered across the newly laid wooden floor. Hannah bent to pick them up. The moment her fingers brushed the edge of one photo, her heart stalled. In the picture, James looked at least 10 years younger, his hair a bit longer, his smile easy and unguarded. Standing next to him was another man, dark-haired, with a sharp smile and the confident eyes she knew all too well. Richard Garrett. Both wore suits, standing in front of a skyscraper under construction, with cranes and orange safety netting in the background. She held the photograph for several seconds, trying to understand why James would have such a friendly picture with Garrett, the very man trying to swallow Gull's Point whole. The newly hung wooden door creaked. James stepped inside, toolbox in hand. When he saw the photo in her fingers, he froze as if blocked by an invisible wall. "You're going to explain this, right?" Hannah asked, her voice low, but edged enough to cut through the space between them. James set the box down and walked closer. He didn't snatch the photo back, only exhaled deeply, as if he'd known this moment would come sooner or later. "That's a part of my past I didn't want to bring in here. But it's already here," she replied, eyes still fixed on the image. He sat down on a wooden chair he'd built himself, resting his elbows on his knees. 11 years ago in Seattle, Garrett and I were partners in a major construction firm. I handled engineering and safety. He took care of financing and contracts. His voice dropped, each word heavy as nails driven into wood. One high-rise condominium project. Garrett decided to cut safety costs. I fought him on it. We had a huge argument. I threatened to walk, but before I could, the 17th floor slab collapsed during a concrete pour. Hannah swallowed hard. "Was anyone—" His eyes darkened. "My wife, Julia, and our 4-year-old son, Ben, were at the site that day. Julia was bringing me lunch. They never made it out." The room went utterly still. Hannah could hear the ocean outside, each wave pounding against the rocky point like a hammer striking inside her chest. "I lost everything in a matter of seconds," James continued, his voice hoarse. "Garrett used money and lawyers to walk away clean. He sold the company and vanished from Seattle. I drifted for years, But then I heard he'd started targeting coastal towns. When I learned Gulls Point was next, I came here. Not just to build a house, to stand in his way this time. Hannah gripped the photo tighter, feeling her fingertips tremble. So, everything you've been doing this house, choosing this piece of land, it's all part of some plan for revenge? James met her gaze directly. I won't deny it, but it's also a chance to get it right this time, to protect the community before it's crushed. She felt as if the air had been yanked out of her lungs. And what about me? Were you planning to drag me into this without telling me? Hannah. He stood, closing the distance between them, his voice low. I didn't want you caught up in it. I thought, if I could keep you out of the mess. But you haven't kept me out, she cut in. You had me stand beside you at town hall, had me talk to people all while Garrett was watching. Now I'm a target too. Something flickered in his eyes, pain. Maybe, but she refused to let herself soften. Anger, a sense of betrayal, and a deep compassion for his loss, all tangled together in a storm she couldn't sort out. I need time, Hannah said, her voice quiet but firm. She set the photo down on the table, right beside the still warm box of blueberry muffins, and walked to the door. James didn't call after her. The only sound was the wind, rising harder now, scattering a few blueprints across the floor, as if the storm had truly begun. In the early days of March, the ocean wind carried a sharp, briny bite like a salt-edged cut. On Main Street, shop windows began filling with stark legal notices, cold white sheets stamped with bold black letters. Notice of legal action and delinquent property taxes. Garrett no longer smiled at community meetings the way he used to. Instead, his team of lawyers appeared everywhere, carrying thick folders from door to door, shop to shop. They didn't knock with polite greetings. They laid documents on counters, pointed to fine print, and said, "You entered incorrect information in your 2016 filing. Last year's property tax wasn't paid in full." Minor administrative errors, sometimes as small as checking the wrong box on an old form, were now being weaponized. Those unable to afford legal defense were pressured into signing property sale agreements to settle things quickly. Hannah saw the toll every day at the clinic. Mrs. Collins, an elderly patient who came in weekly for blood pressure checks, broke into tears mid-appointment after receiving a lawsuit notice. Tim Harris, the retired fisherman she'd once advised to hold on to his dock to avoid losing his license, now sat silent, calloused hands trembling as he told her his utilities had been cut off for non-compliance with a new service agreement. One afternoon, while Hannah was scrubbing her hands before her next patient, a nurse poked her head in and murmured, "Someone's asking to see you," privately at the front desk. Out front stood a man she didn't recognize, dressed in a dark suit, hair slicked smooth. He smiled politely and set a thin envelope on the counter. "Just some friendly advice," he said lightly. "Those who stand too close to Mr. James Marshall tend to run into trouble." Hannah didn't touch the envelope. "Is that a threat?" His smile never wavered. "A reminder. Garrett doesn't like wasting his time on people who aren't involved." Then he walked out, leaving the envelope behind. Inside was a single sheet, a photograph of the clinic's front entrance, clearly taken from across the street, with the words printed beneath, "Some things are too fragile to survive a storm." Hannah's grip tightened until the edges of the paper creased. She knew this wasn't about her. It was a message aimed at her patients, at the place she considered the backbone of the community. She hadn't seen James since the confrontation over the photograph, but now something restless stirred inside her. She was angry at him, felt dragged into a fight she hadn't chosen. Yet she also knew what Garrett was doing was real, calculated, and cruel. And if no one stopped him, Gulls Point would be devoured. Late at night, when the clinic was dark, Hannah could still see the white LED glow from James's site spilling onto the coastal road. No matter how tired he must have been, he kept working, his tall figure moving between the timber frames like he was part of the structure itself. Then one morning, when she unlocked the clinic, she found a neatly stacked package on the doorstep. Several boxes of medical gloves, 2 cases of sterile gauze, and a thick envelope. Inside was a paid invoice covering all the clinic's supplies for the next 3 months, along with a short handwritten note. "So no one has to worry about anything when they come here." Her fingers lingered over the words. a knot of frustration and reluctant gratitude tightening in her chest. James hadn't shown up in person, hadn't offered an explanation, he'd simply done it quietly. Garrett, however, was anything but quiet. His chokehold tightened. New public utility contracts required infrastructure upgrade fees, double the previous rates. Some families had to choose between paying for electricity or buying their medication. Hannah saw young patients abandon treatment because they couldn't afford gas to get to the clinic. One late evening, as Hannah was locking up, Mrs. Dawson, one of her patients, stood hesitating at the doorway. "Hannah, if I sell my house to them, at least I'll have the money to pay for my treatments." The words cut deep. Hannah had to swallow against the lump in her throat. "You'll lose more than your house, Mrs. Dawson. You'll lose your neighbors, your community. Don't rush into it. I'll find a way." But even as she said it, she wondered if she really could. Outside, the waves pounded the shore with growing force. Hannah knew the pressure was building not just on the town, but inside her own heart. She could stay on the sidelines and let James face this fight alone, or she could step in, knowing it meant confronting both Garrett and the ghosts of James's past. That question followed her all night, through the howl of the wind at her windows, until the first light of dawn broke over the small coastal town. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. The afternoon sea breeze in Gulls Point usually carried a gentle salt tang and a pleasant chill, but today Hannah felt something different in it, heavier, almost as if it were warning her that something was coming. The community clinic on Main Street was winding down toward the quiet of evening as the clock edged closer to 6. Hannah walked the last patient of the day, Mrs. Jensen, a woman in her 70s with chronic knee pain, to the door. "Thank you, Hannah," Mrs. Jensen smiled, giving her hand a light squeeze. "Tomorrow I'll bring you some apple turnovers." "I'll be waiting," Hannah replied, her eyes softening. When Mrs. Jensen disappeared around the corner, Hannah turned back inside to tidy up. The faint scent of antiseptic mingled with the herbal aroma from the tea brewing on her desk. She carefully filed away patient records, switched off the lights one by one, leaving only the dim golden glow in the hallway that led to the back door. The rear parking lot was usually still. Light from the street lamps fell in broken patches across the asphalt, glinting off the last of the season's maple leaves spinning in the wind. Her silver SUV was parked at the far end, near the wooden fence. Hannah pulled her coat tighter and crossed the lot quickly. She was fishing for her keys when she heard a faint sound like gravel shifting underfoot. She turned. No one. Just a black pickup truck parked 30 yards away, its windows dark, unmoving. Hannah swallowed the discomfort rising in her chest, telling herself it was just a diner customer's vehicle from the place down the street. The moment she turned back, a rough hand clamped over her mouth. The smell of leather and sweat hit her nose. "Quiet," a low, icy voice murmured at her ear. Hannah struggled, but another arm locked around her waist, dragging her toward the shadows. A dark van slid its side door open in front of her. In seconds, she was shoved inside. The door slammed shut, and darkness swallowed her whole. Her heart pounded wildly, each beat thudding against her ribs. She forced herself to breathe steadily, to keep from spiraling into panic. The man sitting to her left wore a black jacket, a baseball cap pulled low. His cold eyes flicked over her once before looking away. The driver said nothing, focusing on the road. They wound through a few narrow streets where the streetlights grew sparse. Hannah tried to count the turns, memorizing the direction. But before long, the coastal roads all blurred together darkness and the distant, relentless sound of waves. The van rolled to a stop at the old harbor, long abandoned. The door opened, and cold air slammed into her. She was hauled out, her heels striking the damp concrete. Ahead loomed a warehouse, its corrugated roof rusting, some windows shattered and patched with plywood. The stench of salt, rotting wood, and old engine oil clung to the air. Inside, the only light came through narrow cracks in the walls, streaking faintly across the floor. The steady rhythm of waves slapping against the seawall echoed in the gloom, a reminder of how far she was from safety. Her escorts pushed her toward a corner of the warehouse. A tall figure waited there. When he turned, Hannah recognized him instantly, Richard Garrett. The flawless gray suit, the neatly knotted tie, the cold eyes, and the thin smile that never reached them. "Hannah," he said, his tone soft, as though greeting an old acquaintance. "A shame we have to meet like this." "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice as steady as she could. Garrett stepped closer, stopping just in front of her. "I want James Marshall to understand he's playing a game he cannot win. And you are going to help me send that message." He pulled out his phone, dialed, and pressed it to his ear. "James, I have Hannah. If you want her safe, come to Warehouse 3 at the docks. Alone. You have 30 minutes. He hung up, slipped the phone away, and fixed his gaze on her. "He'll come. And when he does, he'll understand who's in control of this game." A cold shiver slid down her spine, but she didn't let it show. Her eyes scanned the space. 2 men at the door, standing far apart, the light source off to the left, and at the far end of the warehouse, a narrow door leading out to the pier. Garrett took a seat on an old wooden chair, crossing one leg over the other. "I'll admit, you're a strong woman, but everyone has a weakness. James won't let you be harmed. That's why I chose you." Hannah clenched her hands, feeling the zip ties bite into her wrists. She knew she had to find an opening, but for now, all she could do was keep her mind sharp and hope James was clever enough to turn this situation to his advantage. Outside, the wind whipped harder, and Garrett's footsteps faded into the distance, each one ticking down the clock toward whatever would happen next. The west wind off the sea lashed against his face, carrying the raw taste of salt and a damp, biting chill. James gripped the steering wheel of the pickup tighter, eyes locked on the gravel road that wound toward his land at Gull's Point. Garrett's voice from the call still scraped at his thoughts like metal on stone. Alone. 30 minutes. Garrett wanted him to come alone. But Gull's Point had never been a place where anyone faced trouble alone. As the truck rolled onto his property, the timber frame of the new house rose against the gray afternoon. James didn't look at it. His eyes were fixed on the far north corner, where the old bell tower still stood, defiant against the wind and sea spray. It wasn't tall, just over 12 feet, weathered cedar gray with age, topped with a bronze bell scarred by rust like old wounds. It had been here since the late 19th century, when the fishing community's ancestors used it to signal storms, call for rescue, or summon the town. The bell codes had been passed down through generations. One long toll, call the community together. 2 short tolls, a ship returning. 3 long tolls, urgent danger, come armed. James knew the code because his grandfather had taught it to him, with one warning. Never pull 3 long tolls unless you truly need the whole town standing with you. Today he needed them. He climbed the wooden steps, his rough hands closing around the frayed rope. His chest expanded as he poured every ounce of fear, fury, and resolve into the first pull. Gong! The deep tone vibrated through his ribs. Gong! The second rolled through the pines, past the cliff's edge, and out over the waves. Gong! The third stretched long and sharp, slicing through the sea mist impossible to mistake. 3 long tolls, urgent danger. James released the rope and let the sound bleed into the wind. In his mind's eye, he could already picture it. At the roadside cafe, someone setting down their coffee with a sharp glance. In the repair shop, an engine going silent as mechanics exchanged nods and reached for baseball bats or old hunting rifles. It took less than 10 minutes for the first engines to rumble toward him. Tom Harris's old Ford appeared first, its faded blue paint hiding a still solid motor. The Price's minivan followed, the trunk crammed with flashlights, rope, and first aid blankets. Lucas, the lumberyard owner, arrived with a rack of heavy tools in the bed of his truck. James stepped down from the bell tower and moved toward them. In the dimming light, the circle of people grew quickly. No one asked what had happened. They'd heard the bell, and that was enough. Garrett has Hannah, James said, his voice low but cutting. He's holding her in Warehouse 3 at the old docks. He wants me to come alone. Lucas's grip tightened on his hammer strap, eyes flashing. We're not letting him lay a finger on her. Mrs. Dawson, leaning on her cane in the front, her hand trembling but her eyes fierce, said, "That girl's saved my life more than once. Now it's our turn to save hers." A ripple of agreement passed through the group. Without much discussion, they split tasks. James would lead the main group through the front to draw attention. Lucas and three others would circle around to the back to cut off the pier. Tom, the Prices, and two young men would lock down the side exits. James opened the pickup's tailgate, pulling out a legally registered handgun and a heavy-duty flashlight. He didn't like violence, but he knew Garrett wouldn't stop unless stopped right there. As the others prepared, James looked toward the sea. The water was darkening, whitecaps smashing against the rocky point, sending spray high like the roar of some unseen crowd. In his mind, Hannah's face flickered, her quiet smile in the doorway with a bunch of yellow tulips. The touch of her hand on his shoulder, steady and sure. "Hold on, Hannah, I'm coming." The convoy rolled out of Gull's Point with headlights dimmed, ghost-like shapes slipping down the road together. Engine noise blended with the rhythm of the surf, taut as a drawn bowstring. Behind the wheel, James's hands were steady, but his eyes carried a storm. The bell's toll had faded into the distance, but its echo still pounded in his chest, not just a call for help, but the unspoken promise of a town. "We won't let anyone stand alone." The air inside the abandoned dockside warehouse was thick, as though even the salt from the sea had been shut out. High, narrow windows, their glass etched and clouded by years of wind-blown grit, leaked only thin ribbons of tired sunlight. Dust motes drifted and vanished into the shadows. The mingled stench of old oil, rotting timber, and damp mildew clung to Hannah's throat, making every breath feel like it was lined with splinters. She was tied to a rough wooden post, the rope cinched so tight her hands had long since gone numb. A strip of cloth jammed across her mouth forced her breathing into shallow, aching pulls. She tried to keep her thoughts steady, but her pulse thundered anyway, not from fear of the dark, but because she knew Garrett never did anything without a plan. He stood a few yards away, his shadow stretched across the oil-stained floor. The slate-gray suit, the gleaming black shoes, they looked absurdly clean against the blistered paneling and rusted beams. His eyes were sharp and glacial, stripped of the faux warmth he wore at community meetings. Footsteps echoed from the main entrance, slow, heavy, deliberate, each one grating across Hannah's nerves. The door swung wide. James stepped in tall, shoulders squared under a faded flannel, bare forearms dusted from work, jeans marked with grit. Light from the doorway cut across the hard lines of his face, catching in the storm-gray eyes that flicked toward her for less than a heartbeat, but enough to anchor her like a tether in rough seas. "Let her go!" His voice rolled out, low and steady, not loud, but more than enough to slice through the warehouse's stale air. Garrett's brow lifted. A humorless curve bent his mouth. "First, sign this." He laid a sheaf of papers on a battered table between them and nudged a pen forward. "Transfer the Gulls Point property, right now," and the nurse walks out in one piece. James advanced a few paces, holding distance. "You think I'll take the word of a man who collapsed an entire project just to save a buck?" Garrett gave a shrug that was almost bored. "Believe me or not, the clock's running, and she," his glance cut toward Hannah, "doesn't have much time." Hannah's spine drew tight. She searched James's eyes for some trace of a plan, but he simply moved with calm purpose, lifting the pen and turning it in his fingers, as though weighing the choice. "Before I sign," James said slowly, "tell me that quilt my grandmother gave you. You still have it." Hannah blinked. "Quilt?" She remembered James once mentioning that in Gull's Point's old rescue code, a red square in the center that never fades was a signal. Danger, the team is ready to act. Garrett snorted. "Still clinging to those backwater superstitions?" James's shoulders rolled in a faint shrug, eyes never leaving Garrett's. "She told me the red square is the heart, the part that never fades no matter how many years pass." That was when Hannah heard it faint sounds outside, the crunch of grit under boots, the metallic chink of gear shifting, the boom of waves slapping the pier harder than usual. Not just James. A sharp police siren split the air, shattering the stillness. Shouts barked from multiple directions. "The hell!" Garrett's head snapped around. He snarled an order at the two men near the doors. "Lock it down!" But they were too late. The side door screeched and crashed inward, hinges screaming. White beams of flashlights sliced across the gloom. "Sheriff's Department, Drop your weapons. Sheriff Cole's voice cracked through the chaos. No room for argument. One of Garrett's men yanked a pistol free and fired. The crack of 3 shots ricocheted against the beams. Splinters rained from the rafters. The smell of gunpowder bit into the air. Outside, return fire sparked against the corrugated walls. Garrett lunged toward Hannah, looping an arm around her throat, dragging her in front of him like a shield. His breath burned against her ear, laced with liquor and stale smoke. The rope bit deeper into her wrists. Her vision swam. James took one step forward, his grip tightening around the pen as though gauging the moment. Let her go, Garrett. This isn't Seattle. You can't buy your way out here. Garrett's hold tightened. Sign it. The next second fractured into pure instinct. James shifted left as if to place the pen on the table, then snapped his arm and hurled it straight into Garrett's face. The older man flinched, loosening his grip for just an instant. James slammed forward, twisting Hannah free, and spun Garrett off balance. A sharp pivot and a shoulder drive sent him crashing to the floor. The gun skittered across the concrete. Sheriff Cole and 2 deputies surged in, disarming and pinning the others. Garrett fought like a cornered animal, but steel cuffs clamped shut on his wrists, cold and final. Hannah stumbled, knees weak, but James caught her. The first thing he did was rip the gag from her mouth, his eyes scanning her face. You all right? She nodded shakily. You didn't come alone. His mouth curved faintly, though the tension in his gaze lingered. Told you the foundation has to be solid, for a house and for the one you love. She turned her head. Outside, the sweep of red and blue lights painted the night sea in flashes. Beyond the cordon of deputies, she saw them, the people of Gulls Point. Mrs. Dawson in her worn knit coat. Lucas leaning on his cane. The Prices standing hand in hand. Tom Harris, stooped but steady. They didn't cheer or wave. They just stood there, silent and unyielding, like a seawall holding back the tide. The wind was still cold, but Hannah felt warmth spread through her chest. She understood now she had been saved not only by one man, but by an entire community that refused to leave anyone behind. That morning, Gulls Point sky looked as if it had been washed clean after a night of spring rain. White clouds drifted lazily, parting to reveal a soft blue backdrop. The first rays of sunlight rippled across the gently murmuring sea, gilding the waves with a sheen of gold. The air was rich with the scent of salt and freshly cut grass. The breeze sifted through the pines, their branches whispering like a chorus of applause. James's new home stood tall on land that had once been abandoned, now transformed into the beating heart of the community. Ivory paint embraced the warm wooden frame, the red clay roof tiles blending seamlessly with the earth and sky. Wide windows stood open to flood every room with light. From the coastal road, you could still see the bell tower on the west corner, the same one whose bronze bell had tolled on the night Hannah was saved, now a symbol of solidarity and strength. But the most remarkable part lay not in the house's outward beauty. The moment you stepped through the front door, you knew it was more than a private home. To the right was James and Hannah's family living space, a cozy sitting room with a stone fireplace, a large bookshelf filled with novels and photo albums, and armchairs upholstered in patterned wool that Hannah had personally chosen. To the left, separated by a sliding glass and wood partition, was the community room, a space James had insisted on building. The community room had maple floors, cream-painted walls, and wide windows that opened to the ocean breeze. One wall held a bulletin board announcing town meetings, skill class schedules, and photos from past community dinners. Long tables, built from reclaimed wood, filled the center wide enough to seat everyone shoulder to shoulder. A corner shelving unit was stocked with everything from model boat kits and art supplies to baskets of yarn and crochet hooks. On Wednesday afternoons, the room became a skill-sharing classroom. Lucas teaching net mending, Mrs. Dawson demonstrating sourdough baking, the Prices giving lessons in organic gardening. On weekends, it turned into the backdrop for communal dinners, steaming pots of seafood chowder, loaves of fresh-baked bread, children darting between tables, adult laughter mingling with the steady rhythm of the waves outside. Hannah had loved the room from the first sketch on paper. It will keep this town connected long after Garrett and men like him are gone, she'd said, and James had simply nodded because it was exactly what he wanted too. In their private wing, life had shifted dramatically from the day James laid the first plank. Gone were the long silences and cautious distance between them. Now Hannah rose early to make coffee, while James handled breakfast. The smell of pancakes, the murmur of the sea, and the quiet giggles of children had become the house's morning soundtrack. Those children were the three they had recently adopted from the foster system, three once separate lives, now bound by a shared home. Mia, the eldest at 11, was reserved but observant, her dark eyes always taking everything in. Caleb, 9, was a whirlwind of energy, forever carrying the small whittling knife James had given him, learning to carve wood the way James did. And Lily, the youngest at 6, had hair like soft curls of cloud, and a voice so pure it could make a room go still just to listen. On their first day home, the three had moved tentatively over the polished wood floors. James crouched to Lily's height and offered her a tiny rocking chair. "I made it for you," he said, his deep voice warm. Lily's fingers traced the grain, her eyes wide. Mia received a bookshelf just her size, with a secret compartment. Caleb got a beginner's whittling kit, the wooden handle carved with a big C. James kept his habit of crafting something for each family member by hand. They weren't just functional items, they carried his patience and affection in every cut, every coat of oil. Hannah liked to tease that every piece had its own heartbeat. One autumn afternoon, with the sun slanting through the pines and the sea turning silver, Hannah walked into James's workshop. He was smoothing the surface of a large slab of wood. "Who's that for?" she asked. He smiled without looking up. "All of us. A dining table big enough so that whenever the community needs it, we can invite everyone to sit together." The words stilled her. She remembered the days when Garrett had the town under siege, when everyone had closed themselves off, guarding their own patch of ground. Now, under this roof, they weren't scattered individuals anymore, but a family woven together like a single net. That winter, they hosted their first Christmas dinner at the coastal home. The offshore wind was sharp, but inside the community room, the fire blazed, and warm yellow light pooled over every face. On the new long table, James's handiwork, platters of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, braised vegetables, and Mrs. Dawson's bread filled the space between people leaning in to talk. Mia read a Christmas poem she'd written at school. Caleb showed off a new model boat he'd built. Lily sang a lullaby Hannah had taught her. Applause rippled through the room, folding into the faint hush of the waves beyond the windows, music only Gull's Point could make. At the far end of the table, James watched Hannah help Lily ladle more soup. Warmth spread from his chest to his fingertips. When Hannah looked up, their eyes met, and in that moment, he knew every path he'd walked, every loss he'd endured, had led him here. Outside, the bell tower kept its silent watch. The bell hadn't rung since that night, but for James and Hannah, it was no longer only a call for aid. It had become a promise. No matter what storms might come, this house, this community, and this family would stand. James and Hannah's wedding day arrived after a radiant spring in Gull's Point. The small town seemed awakened by wildflowers along the roadside, the cry of gulls, and mornings drenched in sunlight. From early dawn, neighbors and friends gathered around the coastal home to prepare. There was no hired staff, only willing hands. Mrs. Dawson took charge of the wedding cake, Mr. Lucas built the floral arch, and a group of teenagers decorated the long tables with seashells and beach blooms. Hannah wore a simple white dress of soft silk, fitted at the waist and falling lightly to her ankles. On her hair rested a crown of baby's breath, woven by Mia's careful hands. When she stepped onto the porch, she saw James waiting beneath the arch facing the sea. The navy suit sharpened the steel gray of his eyes. His smile made her both tremble and feel safe, the smile of a man who had found his harbor. The ceremony took place outdoors, in the wide front yard of the coastal home. The ocean's steady rhythm served as their music, the breeze carrying salt and the scent of fresh-cut grass. Friends, neighbors, and all those who had once stood together against Garrett were there. Each person was a piece of the story, a keeper of the memories they had forged. When the minister asked, "Do you take each other for as long as you both shall live?" they answered, "I do," in unison, their voices steady and sure. Applause broke out, mingling with the long, resonant toll of the bell tower, not an alarm, but an announcement to the whole town. A new chapter had begun. The wedding feast was the largest community dinner yet. Long tables were arranged in a U-shape, draped in white cloth, and covered with dishes brought by every household: grilled oysters, steaming chowder, apple pies, crisp garden salads. Children raced in the sand, laughter ringing. The adults lifted glasses and traded old stories. James and Hannah weren't the sole focus, but part of the larger circle of kinship. A few weeks later came another surprise. One morning, Hannah stood in the bathroom, staring at the pregnancy test in her hand, two clear red lines. Her heart pounded, tears welling before she could name what she felt. Years ago, doctors had told her the chances of conceiving were slim. She had made peace with that, finding joy in the children they had adopted. But now, in this ordinary, sunlit moment, life had quietly delivered a gift. She walked into the living room, where James sat sketching plans for a new crib. Without a word, she placed the test on the table before him. He blinked, looked up, and in his eyes she saw everything at once: astonishment, joy, gratitude, and a touch of awe. Standing, he pulled her into his arms and whispered, "We're building something even bigger now." The news spread quickly through town. Everyone offered something. Mrs. Dawson knitted a soft blanket. Mr. Price promised to craft a wooden swing for the yard. The teenagers volunteered to repaint the fence so the new baby would have a safe place to play. That summer, James and Hannah decided to host a seaside picnic, not just to celebrate the coming child, but to honor the family they had built, both by blood and by heart. On the morning of the picnic, the sky was a flawless blue, sunlight scattering diamonds across the waves. The coastal home's doors stood wide open. James climbed the bell tower, grasped the rope, and pulled not 3 urgent peals, but 2 clear, ringing chimes. The old Oregon Coast Code for "Gather for Celebration." The sound rolled through the town. Doors opened, footsteps quickened. Groups of people made their way to the beach, carrying baskets of food and holding their children's hands. On the sand, long tables had been set parallel to the sea, covered in white linen and decorated with shells and jars of flowers Hannah had arranged herself. The picnic began with laughter and the scent of good food. Scallops grilled in garlic butter, smoked salmon, fresh baked bread, crisp cucumber salad. Children flew kites in the breeze. Old men played chess under sunshades. Mothers chatted beside baby strollers. Midway through, James rose, lifting a glass of lemonade. "When I came to Gull's Point, I thought I was just building a house," he said. "But today, looking around, I realize a home isn't wood, brick, or roof tiles. Home is here." He gestured to the circle of people gathered, where there's love, trust, and a community that stands together. Hannah's fingers tightened around his, a smile warming her face. She could feel his heartbeat through the link of their hands. She knew that whatever the future brought, storm or calm, they had a foundation strong enough to hold. As the sun dipped westward, gilding the sea, children combed the shore for shells while the adults gathered around the tables, their talk and laughter weaving into the sound of the waves. And when the bronze bell rang out once more this time, to call everyone for the largest pie Mrs. Dawson had ever baked, Hannah lifted her head, thinking, "This is the home I've dreamed of."